Okay. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Ian Overton. I'm the Schiller Institute, LaRouche Political Movement, LaRouche PAC, and everything we're doing here. And we're having our meeting here. This is our weekly chapter meeting in Houston as part of a national series of activist meetings that are happening all over the country and all over the world. And we are organized under the scientific policies of Lyndon LaRouche, who is a World War II era, still alive, 93-year-old economic forecaster who has based his economic forecasts on the unique perspective not of monetary trends or statistical flows or analyses of production cycles, but on the natural physical laws of the physical universe, which are immaterial but act in an efficient manner upon the entire basis of nature. And to make forecasts on future events in the economy so as to cause bad things not to happen in order to clear the way for good things to actually happen. And to qualify that, we'll get into the discussion here a little bit. But I think it's important to kind of situate where we are right now, where we are in history, because in order to truly understand and then act upon and change the course of history, you can't just take it from the momentary day by day. You actually have to have an understanding of the arcs that are in play, which sometimes go back or forward hundreds or thousands of years. And they all act upon us right now, even as forces, even if you may not know about them. They're still ongoing. Where we are right now is we are actually in the midst of an accelerating rate of accelerating blowout of the entire transatlantic. Now it's coming away, and it's going to be bloody and disastrous as soon as the end of this year. And what I mean by that is you're looking at an unavoidable collapse situation, which is precipitated by certain things that are going on in junk bonds and the oil commodity trading and so forth around this whole bubble that's been created around the oil situation, fracking, and all these other trading and energy commodities. But it's not an oil commodities crisis. Just as what was happening in 2007 and 8 was not a mortgage crisis. Just like what was happening in 1998, 1999 was not a bond crisis in the Asian markets. Because what we're dealing with here is the actual blowout of a system, an economic arrangement, an organization of people and their economies, which is based upon artificial values of money per se. And the problem is when you're dealing with a universe which is governed by physical laws, we physically have to improve the standard of living to support people. Having an economy that's based upon derived values of basically gambling debts is completely irrelevant to actually sustaining life. And we're at a situation where the piper is being paid, in a sense. The looting and destruction over several generations of the actual physical underpinnings of society, the elimination of any sort of research and development which is driving new technologies into being, has been eliminated. So we're at the burning, smoldering end of a long process of willful attrition, which was designed to allow for a small grouping of financiers and other people with access to capital to try to manage and control what is actually a completely uncontrollable situation. So there is immense panic going on amongst people who recognize this, but don't have an understanding, as our movement and LaRouche uniquely does, of what to actually do about it. And the principal reason they do not have this understanding is because, number one, they don't understand the long arc of history. Number two, They don't understand what makes a human being unique from and superior to an animal in the ability to understand these natural laws. And three, most importantly, they don't have the courage to act against this oligarchy and do the very simple and easy to understand things that must be done to turn the page on this crisis, to restore what the foundation of the country was established to do under the leadership and direction, especially of Alexander Hamilton, in setting up an economy for a republic. And that's what we are. We are a republic, and we have a certain economic policy point of view which allows for us to deal with problems exactly of this nature. Problems of a complete, utter, and accelerating total collapse of the oligarchy of the world. And that is something that we have to act upon immediately. So that by the time the new year comes around, we're already in a position to have gotten through the beginnings of a real physical recovery in place. And so what Mr. LaRouche has said is the basis by which we can think about this is we have to revive the spirit and intention of Franklin Roosevelt, who was the last president who really fully did this and had and pushed it through, marshaled the country and rallied the population in this fashion. And that's an important challenge, especially living in the South, where there has been an enduring legacy of small-minded Confederacy type thinking, going all the way back to the foundation of the country and the problems of people like Thomas Jefferson and the slavery problem. And the problem that thinking that the only definition of government is an institution which perpetuates itself for its own power and its own self. Hamilton had an entirely different conception of government, which was subordinated to the concept of the preamble of the Constitution and having an economic method by which that is realized through increases in the power of the population, its physical output, its creative development, and the ability to actually pay off its debts through the exercise of those first two things. And that's what we're going to do. If we're going to avert a general disaster by which the living standards of the population is reduced beyond destitution to a rapidly increasing death rate, as is already happening in Europe, as is already happening in Southwest Asia, as is already happening in several elements underneath the radar of the media currently in the United States, we have to immediately take very specific actions. The first of these actions is we have to shut down Wall Street. We have to kill Wall Street. Wall Street is trying to kill you, all of us. So we have to kill Wall Street first. And that's very easy to do because Wall Street is in fact already dead.
They're the undead.
They are the undead.
What zombies?
It is a zombie banking system, which is predatory, and it's preying on your brains through your wallet. But it's true, though. I mean, this is the situation. We have built up, through the Wall Street system, a previously illegal method of usury, which was illegal until 1987. And this method of usury has now taken on a metastasized, cancerous form that is greater than 99.9% of all the real assets that are actually in circulation. And the name of this cancer is called derivatives. This cancer is so bad it has even taken the ink out of my pen. How do you like that?
$2 million, right?
quadrillion was the last reported amount from about a year and a half ago.
What do you think it is? Is it over two now?
Most likely.
The last I ever heard was just a bit under two.
Lose count. Derivatives.
Yeah, right.
It's a lot.
Does anyone know what a derivative is?
Something that is derived from something.
Okay, that's like a side bet. It's like some kind of a thing. They call these organizations hedge funds, right? Because you're usually trying to hedge some kind of a gambling situation, to protect yourself. And the most common version of it is an interest rate swap. Right? The interest rate swap says that you get these jurisdictions, like these counties and cities and sometimes even a whole state, which are going to, just in order to do the kinds of things they normally do, we're going to have to borrow money. And they can no longer get like fixed rate loans, right? So that they borrow money on floating rates, right? And then they try to convert that floating rate to a fixed rate with an interest rate swap. That is to say that they take, they go out and they borrow the money they need, and then they do some other kind of a deal with one of these banks that does derivative trading, right? And the derivative deal says that if the interest rate rises, the swap is going to pay me money, and if it goes down, I'm going to pay the swap money in such a way that if somebody were to manage one of these hedge funds in an intelligent way, which I assume that Romney was doing, it's conceivable like. To me, it's not inconceivable. I'll put it that way. It's not inconceivable. It might go for a long time without getting blown up, right?
So, but the point about a derivative is that a derivative are people who are not even involved in that,
right,
who are betting on the outcome of that. So they're betting on the outcome of other outcomes, and they're trading that money. Yeah, it's the whole thing. Of course, the whole thing is crazy because it's fictitious.
I mean, the only person in the universe who could do a quadrillion dollar deal is God. Right, it would have to be like, Lord, I've got a bank check for $1 quadrillion, and I need about 5 or 6 planets, like the little blue one I'm living on, for my portfolio. Do you suppose that would be the banker's prayer?
Yeah.
Right.
So the point is that yes, the on the books. This is on the books. The on the books of derivatives, as of about a year and a half ago, was about 2.2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's 100,000 million billion.
I think you're so short.
You're gonna run out of room.
100,000 million billion trillion quadrillion. That's about 2.2 quadrillion dollars as of World Bank reports in the beginning of last year. Okay, in the last year. So we're talking about, since then, a whole year of activity, and you've seen some of it, if you've been paying attention to any of this stuff, you've seen the way the stock markets have been going crazy anyway. So we're probably on the order of approach, because these guys also accelerate their rate of raping. So we're looking probably closer to $3 quadrillion now. That's my guess, and that's on the books. That doesn't even take into consideration all the off the books tradings that have been going on, as in the Islamic State selling Saudi oil to the Turks on the black market. I think it's traded and upvalued on the spot market. And that's been going on in various forms between the Saudis and the British for almost 40 years now. But the point here is that this, because it has no basis to anything real, this is being held up over your heads. You have to pay this, they say. You have to die. You have to have your assets seized, your car, your house. You are the one who's not going to be able to pay for medicine because we have to have our portfolios. This is the financial stability of the system. This is a bunch of dirty toilet paper, and we have to kill it. Shut it down, flush it. It's not worth anything. All of our retirements or whatever have been reached into this. So in order to protect you, we have to do what FDR did. Write this off. Kill it completely. It was already dead. You don't need it. You don't want it. It's cancer. Kill the cancer.
Can you do that, like, while protecting the ordinary money that runs the physically come into the country?
Absolutely.
That's the problem.
Yes, you can. And the way you do that is you restore what was called, okay, hold on. You restore what was called Glass-Steagall as step number 1. Glass-Steagall draws an impenetrable firewall between the dirty, toxic cancer and what's called commercial banking.
Glass-Steagall was a legislative act.
Correct. It was passed into law by Franklin Roosevelt in the first week and a half of his coming into office in 1933. Carter Glass and Henry Steagall were the principal sponsors in the Senate and the House, so it's named after them. It's also known as the 1933 Banking Act. And the principal basis of this act was, and it had other things, but the principal basis was to separate these two kinds of financial activity. Completely, entirely, you cannot have a person who is operating this kind of asset on the board of directors or involved with the banks of these, and vice versa. They can't trade in each other's, these people cannot issue securities that are then traded by these banks. All these banks are allowed to do, the commercial banks, the boring old normal banks that everyone needs to live, are allowed to do is the normal commercial activity of making loans to business to engage in productive physical economy. When a farmer needs a loan to grab the seeds to plant next year's crop. When a company needs a loan to install new machine tools in the factory floor and upgrade them so that they can incorporate new technologies like electricity or lasers or something else that's a new cutting edge technology of its day. And the basis of this is that under what Hamilton set up, as I mentioned at the beginning, the only institution which has the full authority to issue the credit necessary for this is the U.S. government. Because the U.S. government, unlike private institutions, is entirely beholden to the population. It's accountable legally under orders of transparency that we have to be accountable because we are the representatives of the population. And if we screw the population has recourse to remove us from authority. And the way that this was set up under the New Deal, because the bank that Hamilton had set up was no longer in existence, was Franklin Roosevelt used an institution like that was set up under Hoover called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. And in effect, there is a great similarity between the way Herbert Hoover used the Reconstruction Finance Corporation and the way that today we organized and carried out the bailouts in 2008. There were institutions that were set up, corporations that were set up, called the Troubled Asset Relief Program and others, the TARP, and there was one that was called TALF, I forget what the acronym stood for. But these were institutions where the purpose of their existence was to funnel federal credit into AIG and all these other banks, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, all these robbers, which then they turned around and used to back up not loans to people, but to cover their assets and engage in more speculation. That's how Herbert Hoover used the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. What Franklin Roosevelt did with it is he said, instead of using this corporation as a pass-through to the people who caused the collapse of 29, we're going to use it to actually have a pass-through the commercial banks without recourse to these guys and allow these banks to then issue loans to the population so that people who actually had companies that were engaged in something useful would have access to capital to hire people, to pay them, to build the projects they needed to build. And under the New Deal, under the National Industrial Recovery Act, the Works Progress Administration, there were several, they call it the alphabet soup, but basically there are about 25 various federal projects that were engaged in everything from building sidewalks and schools to national parks to dams and electrification of rural areas, libraries, zoos, flood control for the San Antonio area.
Brake belts.
All kinds of stuff. It was called the Four Corners program. The four corners of the country, everything in between, was engaged in a process of a physical upgrading to the standard of living through real work, not make work, not the on-demand economy like we have today with all these apps that proliferate, where if you're in the right place at the right time, you might get a waiter's wage to go deliver some $12 ice cream to some fat kid who lives in the Heights. Is that what you're doing? That's what I was doing that. It was a total ripoff. But you have the proliferation today of the on-demand economy. Some poor schmuck sitting around with his GPS on his phone, hoping that some rich clientele wants to get something delivered, like some toe jam removal cream or something like that. And it's the same kind of crap that was going on in the New Deal. Oh man, let me go steal some newspapers so I can find some newspapers to hawk on the side of the street, or let me go shake a tree so I can get paid 10 cents to go rake up the leaves. It was make work. This is what was going on. And under FDR, what we said is instead of that, we're going to actually put people to work. Because it's the ability to actually have meaningful work where you can support your family, where you can keep people from dying from preventable diseases, where you can keep children from being malnourished and crying to sleep because they're hungry.
From dying of suicide.
From dying of suicide, which, as you might be aware, since the blowout in the late 90s and the onset of the tyranny of the Bush administration and the Obama administration, the rise in suicides has gone up to the point where there's about, if the previous decline trend in suicides and preventable death from drug abuse had continued to decline as it was during the 90s, there would be an additional 660 million people alive in this country today who are dead. And they're dead because they killed themselves.
660 million?
Yeah,
Thousand. Okay, I'm sorry, 660,000, which is it's a different magnitude less, but the point is still the same. The point is that these are deaths that were caused by the pillaging of the hope of the population. Are under such cruel, lying programs as Hope and Change and Freedom and Democracy. We have destroyed our freedom, we have destroyed our democracy, we have destroyed hope, and we have destroyed change, and people are destroying themselves. And this is unacceptable.
The trend with the suicide rate was going down, was that during what administration? Would that be like the Clinton administration? Were things going better then?
Yeah, things were going better then.
What do you think it was because he was actually a decent guy trying to do the right thing, or was it incidental?
Or less bad. I wouldn't say better.
What you had is you had a situation where there was a financial surplus, which is not entirely based on a physical recovery. Because what we were dealing with under Clinton then blew out afterwards under Bush. However, had Clinton not been, had the presidency, the institution of the presidency not been attacked, because the president at that time put forward a policy, which was LaRouche's policy, to do what the BRICS nations are now doing concretely, we would have had a totally different direction as a planet since then. But that didn't happen, and instead you had the Lewinsky Act, which derailed the entire institution itself, which was a setup. It was a setup.
Given what they were doing to Russia in those days, was
So I want to make a point here, which is that this alone does not solve the problem. It doesn't actually stop people from committing suicide. It doesn't actually put people back to work. It doesn't actually do everything that we need to do. We have to follow up with this. We have to do what FDR did. Do people have any idea what FDR did in the first 2 or 3 months of his administration in terms of the banking? Okay.
You legislated 16 acts.
16 legislative acts. The Congress passed the Glass-Steagall Act in just a couple days. They did it exceptionally quick. And the Glass-Steagall Act, of course, happened in the midst of a banking holiday. What happened is that in the week or so before FDR actually assumed office, after being elected in January, he assumed office in May, I think it was, right?
Elected in November,
November
assumed office in March.
March, yeah, okay, months, whatever. Yeah. So anyhow, when he was actually assuming office, every single bank in the United States had closed. Your corner bank, your state bank, I don't know how many actual nationwide banks there were. I don't think there were very many. They had all closed. You could not go down to the bank and withdraw money. It was not available. This was a crisis, as you can imagine. You need to go buy groceries. You need to go to the doctor. You need to, whatever. You got to make a payment on your electric bill. You could not get the money to do that. You need to pay your employees, right? So FDR said, we're going to use the authority of the federal government under the executive. We're going to issue a bank holiday. And we're going to go into the banks. We're going to acknowledge that they're bankrupt. We're going to open up their books. And we're going to begin a process of bankruptcy reorganization. Reorganizing the assets into these two categories: speculative assets, commercial assets. Banks that were deemed unable to pay off their commercial assets because they didn't really have any, they were simply speculative, were not reopened. Banks that had a process of writing down the speculative over leveraging, it's called leveraging, because see what happened, he explained this in his first fireside chat, where he went directly to the American people to organize them and explain to them what the government was doing. He went to the American people and he explained to them that when you deposit your dollars in a bank, the bank does not simply tuck them under its mattress. The bank then turns around and loans those dollars to someone else who is using them to do what they need to do in terms of running their business or doing the things they need to do. And the basis of this is that at any one given point, there's not actually enough money in the bank for everyone to go to the bank and withdraw all their money all at the same time, which is what people had started to do under the blowout, as they said, oh my God, all of my assets are going away. I need to go and grab whatever I have left so I have something tangible to hold on to. And the bank said, we don't have that money. So what they did is they had the runs on the banks, and the banks said, sorry, we don't have it. As a result of this problem, this exact problem, being completely over leveraged in the amount of speculative assets that they had as their value. So what FDR did during the bank holiday is he said, we're going to cancel this money. We're just going to cancel it. It's not worth anything. It's speculative in the first place, so we're not going to honor it. We're going to flush it. And then the Treasury Department went and issued new money backed by actual productive assets, which was in some sense, I think I had at one point, I might actually still have it, these silver notes I still have them here. Yeah.
Talking 1930s or
Yeah.
1960s now.
1930s.
Can you pass them around?
Okay, I don't actually have in here the silver note that I had, but they were.
You redeem it for silver. Is what
Yeah. No, this is the one that I have here is from 50s, 57. But I can still pass it around. The point is that he was still issuing paper currency. But the point is that if people wanted to, they could redeem the currency for metals. And the point further is that the currency was being directed through these banks to facilitate what we already talked about in terms of the New Deal, a physical increase in the productive powers of labor. And it was not going to this or anything like it. A bag. What about it? Do you want it? So, in his first fireside chat, what he did is he explained this situation. That's how banking actually works. That you're not simply holding on to the cash when it's deposited. It's going around and helping facilitate the various things that make a society function. That the banks have become completely over-leveraged with fictitious money, that this money has now been canceled, and new notes have been issued through the commercial banks to actually go into helping you do what you have to do. In his second fireside chat, which was about two months later, May 7th of 33, he explained further actions that have been taken. Because the new money was a reserve currency, it was based upon the having the ability to exchange it for a metal, like gold or silver or whatever. The markets run out of London had begun to drain the precious metals from the country. They were causing capital flight, like it's now happening in Argentina. They were taking the gold and silver out of the country. So one of the things people attacked Franklin Roosevelt for is he took our gold. He seized our gold. We want to trade in gold, and he took it from us. What he was actually doing is he was preventing London from taking your gold. And I'm not talking about the couple coin bullion you might have from your grandpa, like down in the cellar somewhere or underneath the mattress. I'm talking about Fort Knox here. I'm talking about large amounts of gold, which were the basis of the backing of our currency. That's what they were taking. And they were taking it through the markets. So Franklin Roosevelt initiated a price determination, a cap on that, and he also issued protections to prevent the capital flight. Because if you're going to kick Wall Street out of your paper money and say we're going to base it off of metal, then they're going to go after the metal. And this gets to the critical point of what Alexander Hamilton enunciated very clearly in his reports to the Congress as the first Treasury Secretary, which is that it doesn't really matter what your currency is made of. Whether you're trading in metal, you're trading in paper, you're trading in belly button lint or whatever, you can trade in anything. Trade in credit. You can trade in electronic data bytes. The credit worthiness of the government. You can't trade in cow parts. Those are not allowed.
In what?
In emissions.
Oh, cow parts. Cow parts.
Can't trade in emissions.
How much gold has been taken from Fort Knox before this happened?
More than let's see here. He had mentioned in his in the second one he was talking about. Let's see. There was about 30 billion in debts that was being redeemed with gold, and another 60 or 70 billion of securities and mortgages. However, all the gold in the United States only amounted to 3 to 4 billion, and all the gold in the world only amounted to about 11 billion. So so there was not enough gold in the entire known universe to be able to pay off these debts.
What is the value of gold held in the world now? Yeah.
I don't know exactly. The point is that there's still not enough gold in the known universe that we have access to be able to simply trade in gold.
Right.
What you have to be able to do to make your credit worth something. Say I have a piece of paper, I have something I'm trading, and it is worth what it says is written on there. Is that you have to, as Hamilton directed, is you have to actually put that to work in a physical way, so that you're directing your society in a way where you can actually make more out of what you had. And I'm not just talking about trading around on the markets with money. I'm talking about taking some land and making it able to produce crops. I'm talking about taking an area which is not electrified and electrifying it so that you can do all kinds of new things with machinery. So you take an area which is stricken by flash flooding and deforestation and lack of electricity, and you build dams and you reforest the hillside, and you teach people how to deal with contour farming so that they don't erode their topsoil. And you take a desolate place like the Tennessee Valley and you turn it into a landmark of the world, Tennessee Valley Authority. That's what I mean, is you make something more out of it, physically.
Plus the creative powers of the workforce you're
You don't
developing.
need gold to do that.
Gold of itself doesn't do that. No thing does that, except what Joe said, which is the immaterial thing of the creative spirit of the human mind. The ability of the human mind to understand physical, natural laws, as I started off with, right? And it's that ability which makes a currency worth anything. Because otherwise, it's just a dirty piece of toilet paper, and you wouldn't want to wipe your rear with it because you might get a disease. You know how many times that thing's changed hands. So what you got to do is you have to engage in a process by which you're educating the population around that understanding that there's a physical basis of the economy, and you're going to forecast what will happen, and whether there will be a blowout of a market or a development of a new source of wealth. To be able to say this is going to happen without having it happen requires the ability of you to reason and think beyond your perceptions, beyond the limits of simple sense experience, sight, vision, what you've done in the past, hearing, all these things. And that is actually the basis by which real human economies are run. That's the basis by which a republic is kept by its people. Mm-hmm.
Going back to the FDR in his first few months in office, how many banks were reopened under this basis?
Oh, God. Stumped a teacher here. I think eventually about 3/4 of them were reopened, but there might have been a little bit more. Some were just closed. Yeah, you're stumping the teacher on that one.
What would the typical bank that got closed down have looked like in 1933? Well, they didn't have derivatives then, right? I mean, that's an invention of the 1990s.
80s, yeah.
So what were they doing?
Well, there's all kinds of stuff going on, but primarily they were caught up in the trading of securities. They were caught up in the trading of stocks, and there was built on top of that simple thing. There was built on top of that entire enormous Byzantine structures of holding companies and other just more fluff, basically, more fluff on top of it. And the Pecora investigation was revealing this, and there's a fabulous book which you can't buy anywhere because the people who control book prices are trying to make it impossible to buy. It's called Wall Street Under Oath, and it's written by the commissioner of...
Are you serious?
Yeah. If you go on Amazon or ABE Books or these places, If you even have a copy available, it's probably a couple $100. You can get it through interlibrary loan. You can get it by going to a library and saying, hey, I know it's in some school somewhere, and I do an interlibrary loan and get it. That's how I was able to read it. But
Wall Street Under Oath?
yeah, Wall Street Under Oath, the story of our modern money changers by Ferdinand Pecora. He was
for merely $500.
sorry,
Used for a mere, you can buy one used for a mere $500.
on Amazon.
No
Yeah.
way, $500?
I told you they're trying to make this book unreadable.
Well,
Yeah.
is there an ebook for it?
Probably PDFs, that's what he's saying, that you can be
So,
on.
Anyway, he's
The
making
point
a
is-
point that-
The point is that in the book he details for the layman, meaning us, people who are not federal investigators and specializing in securities fraud, how all the top institutions, whether they were national banks like National City, whether they were purely speculative banks like JP Morgan, or whether they mixed and traded in between those two, that all of these were engaged in a process of buying up everything from your utilities to your senator to building up entire what are called Ponzi schemes, which is basically you're building a pyramid on top of itself, a continual process of robbing Peter to pay Paul, and you're always sort of passing the buck around. And that they were using their immense power and concentration of capital by being the directors of these companies to engage in all kinds of insider trading and ripping people off. And it was willful and it was conscious, and they were doing it very well. They're very good at it.
Crooks usually are.
Especially crooks with power and position, yeah. So that's what FDR did, is he shut down Wall Street. He shut down the banking system. He reopened it back under the Hamiltonian conception. He put it to work by marshaling the population, publicly organizing the population around a mission for the country to actually get people off of welfare doles, to get them off of the misery and into a real productive output that was focused on breakthroughs, critical breakthroughs in new technologies, new developments of machine tool design. The atomic age was being developed. The mastery over the atom for peaceful purposes was being developed, as well as the Manhattan Project as well. But the overall idea of the Manhattan Project was not just simply to drop a bomb somewhere. It was actually to say we have to understand this new physical phenomena that we just were learning about the last 30 years at the turn of the 20th century.
When did that start, the Manhattan Project?
It started in the 1940s. Yeah. So the point here is that obviously Obama is standing in the way of this, and as a result of the insanity of Obama, we are facing not just the inability to deal with this problem, which is raising the death rate dramatically, and you're seeing what's happening in Canada, for example, with the blowout of the oil bubble there. That's just a tremor compared to the earthquake that we're about to see. If we do not remove Obama from office and restore a process of funneling real federal credit through our commercial banking system into the productive economy in ways that dramatically upshift the energy flux density of our economy by shifting to the new technologies that have to be developed. And the LaRouche political movement is now in the finishing stages of issuing a new pamphlet to get the United States to join with the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, who are already taking this policy and using it directly all over the world. They're already doing this. To get the United States to join in this new emerging dynamic which is organized by our movement underneath the auspices of what our movement has been doing with international conferences for the last 30 years, culminating in the last 2 years. They're now actively engaged in implementing wide scale, as in beyond global, New Deal type advancements, from massive new trade corridors stretching across Asia and Africa and the oceans, to specific projects, which we've talked about here in some detail already, from the new canals and dams and power plants and space cities that are being developed, and the development of the Arctic Ocean as an economic corridor, and the connectivity of existing villages and towns so that people can actually transit and trade, as well as fiber optics and telecommunications with satellites and observation for weather forecasting, the development of the ability to control weather so that you don't have to live at the mercy of drought. These are things that these nations especially are doing, which is why they're being targeted for destruction, in the same way that Hitler said that one of the important places he would bomb in the United States was Detroit, because that was the center of our machine tool design industry. Now Obama is the new Hitler, and he's saying we have to target these countries because they're the center of productive industry for the world. But what I want to do is I want to give you an idea of what it is that we actually could be doing. Because it's not enough to simply say, well, we're going to get Obama out, and we're going to shut down the parasites, and we're going to build projects like the New Deal. That's not good enough. Because the New Deal on its own, as great as it was for the 1930s, is wholly inadequate to deal with the 2015s and beyond. We don't want to redo the Apollo program. We have to use yes, these were important stages, but you don't go back to a stage like, remember the 90s or something, and you have all those stupid songs stuck in your head when you go down the grocery store. You have to actually go forward. You gotta go to the 22nd century and have a vision in mind of where we need to be by the time 2115 comes around, and live and organize your society in that way, rather than in the previous manner. So what I'm going to show you, and we can talk about, are some slides that were shown in yesterday's LaRouche Pack webcast. And these slides are they're kind of sneak previews from our upcoming pamphlet, which we're encouraging everyone to contribute copiously to, so that we can have 1 million of these in circulation.
Sacrificially.
Yes.
Yeah, sacrificially.
You want to hit the lights, Joe? And Keisha, can you please grab me some more water? Yeah.
Yeah, the first, I want to tell you easy, right? $1 trillion basically just handed over to the Wall Street Bank.
Can you shrink it a bit, Ian?
Shrink?
Yeah, it's shrinking a little bit. Oh, never mind.
I'll just shrink the text I've written in front of it. How about that?
I was going to ask about the $1 trillion they just handed the Wall Street Bank's target in the form of excess reserves at the Fed. Did that ever get recouped or anything, or is that still sitting there? Are you still paying interest on that?
The whole thing is ridiculous. We're just going to move forward in this way that I just described. So here's the cover. United States joins the New Silk Road, a Hamiltonian vision for an economic renaissance.
Good deal.
Yeah, I think that was a good deal. Sure beats the alternative, right? And as you can see here from the picture, we have a view of Earth from the North Pole, which when you look at the world that way, what you've probably noticed first is that the continents are connected in a way that you don't normally think about, which is through this little piece of land between Alaska and the tip of Siberia. This little piece of water here, which is called the Bering Strait. And the Bering Strait is a pretty desolate place right now, but were we to build the kinds of high-speed rail corridors discussed in this pamphlet, we would be able to transform trade on the entire planet. Instead of relying on airplanes and ships primarily, we could rely on high-speed magnetically levitated rail, which could fly basically just as fast on its levitation as airplanes do, maybe even eventually faster when we begin the process of putting them into evacuated tubes.
That would use a lot less fuel. Is that the reason why? It would be
Well, it's not just from the standpoint of
saving
fuel
energy.
economy or something like that. It's that you're connecting the entire world in a way that it's never been connected before, and not just with rail lines. And I'll get into that.
What do you see like would be the result of that? Is that we would have more goods available to us more quickly, or
Everything,
around
yeah.
the world,
Like for
around
example,
the
when
world? So
when you look at this this link here for the United States, over here you see San Francisco, and over here is the Midwest. When we, under the leadership of Abraham Lincoln, first connected the eastern seaport through St. Louis to San Francisco along basically this route, what's more or less today Interstate 80 in certain parts. We didn't just build a railroad. We integrated the United States as a nation for the first time. So now, instead of taking 6 months and I think it was like $6,000 to either sail on a ship from New York around the southern coast of South America to San Francisco and getting robbed by pirates, or instead of going down to Panama and hiking across the Panama and then boating to San Francisco and getting yellow fever, or instead of basically walking across the Great Plains and the mountains,
The old Oregon Trail.
the old Oregon Trail, and you died from typhus, or you got bit by a snake, or you got captured by winter and had to eat your family, or you got killed by Indians, or horrible things that all happen to people. Little bad days like that, right? And it would now take 6 days to travel by rail, and I think it took like $60, depending on what class of ticket you bought. So you shorten the time by an entire order of magnitude. You shorten the cost by an entire order of magnitude. You can now ship fresh vegetables from one side of the country to the next side of the country. You have the development of time zones for the first time ever, because now there's a need for it. But also you have the development of the center part of the country. There were no cities there. There were no towns there. There was nothing there. There's a lot of things that we've done as a result of this.
And people were awarded land grants so that they could build a town, build houses.
Yeah.
So that this would do that exponentially greater.
On the entire planet. So you think about areas like Waziristan, which is being droned to the point where people are putting pictures of their droned children on their roofs in order to have a moral impact on the drone pilots, to stop them from murdering their families. Instead of having to resort to actions like that, these people could be engaged in building new science centers and engaged in music education. So they could actually be having a sense of the future. Or in a similar way, you can take places like the Rio Grande Valley, where there's such rampant corruption amongst cocaine and the sheriff's departments, that you have a situation where the narcos, are in the control of the border situation. We can deal with these problems not by going on, hand-to-hand combat in people's homes, but by actually transforming the overall context in which people's lives take on meaning. So we're talking about development corridors. We're talking about new industrial centers. We're talking about taking ugly cities like Houston and rebuilding them so that they are actually inspirational cities, so that you have a city center which has a cultural power to it, instead of being, what is our city center now, like the remnants of Enron? What an inspiration, right?
Yeah, people because Houston.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so.
Grand Opera.
Well, that's yeah, and that see that's true, and there, but that needs to be the center, not just in downtown.
You actually think Houston is ugly?
Houston is disgustingly ugly.
Oh,
I mean-
please.
Oh,
I was
please.
in Atlantic, I used to look at
Yeah,
Philly and
yeah.
Baltimore,
Oh
New
my
York, and
God,
Washington
Atlantic
DC.
is
I mean, I thought Houston was sort of a pretty place compared to all that.
My God, you need to get out more. No, so
West University.
I mean Boulder is beautiful, but it's kind of weird in terms of the people who live there. But anyway,
The Heights.
so but what we need to actually, like, for example, when I talk about beautiful, I'm talking about things like, the way that infrastructure was developed in old Europe around the dome of the cupola of the Santa Maria del Fiore in Florence, where you actually have physical laws of architecture in terms of proportion and aesthetical beauty.
Like Renaissance Italy, old Greece.
Mhm.
Yeah, not these
That are-
crazy glass buildings.
Yeah, these
that are-
glass slabs of concrete and weirdness, like Frank Gehry is, oh my God. So anyway, but where you would have something that actually you live in and around your society is living in and around actual aesthetically great architecture. We also have quite a bit of work to do in terms of protecting Earth and developing our understanding of the context that Earth lives in. Contrary to the way that Obama is talking about going out and sitting on an asteroid or something like that, everyone who knows anything about the space program is all saying we have to go back and develop a cislunar space program. Cislunar basically refers to being in orbit around the moon. Basically being involved in low Earth orbit in projects that are engaged in integrating the as yet almost entirely unexplored area of the moon and opening that up to human economy in a real way. And I'm not just talking about helium-3, which is plentiful in lunar dust as a powerful fuel basis for fusion, but I'm talking about all kinds of things, because we can microwave that stuff. We can make launch pads on the moon. We can do all kinds. We can learn a lot about medicine. We can learn a lot about agriculture, because basically when you take a thing out of an environmental context, like one Earth gravity pull, 30 at sea level, about 32 pounds per square inch of pressure that exerts itself on the structure, whether it's your body or a plant or whatever. You take it out of that and you put it in a situation where it doesn't have that force acting on it at all times, which over the long course of time it has developed to be able to withstand. You learn entire new things about it. I love telling this story that I heard at a conference once. There's a company that was studying E. coli, food poisoning, and they took the E. coli and they put it up on the space station. And when the E. coli was no longer under the normal effect of gravity, but was under microgravity, two things happened that were very provocative. Number one, it became much, much more poisonous. And number two, its reproduction rate was much, much greater. So going through the FDA of a treatment for E. coli, which is great. Because if you've ever had E. coli, you want to die. And people do die from that stuff sometimes. Because it's horrible.
Chipotle, yeah.
No, it's a nice joke, but actually no. It was funded by Genetrix, whatever that company is. The CEO was speaking at this conference. But anyways, the point I'm trying to make here is that we can learn a lot. We also have to protect Earth from real threats like comets and asteroids and geomagnetic storms, which could happen at any time without any real warning. And anyone who's involved in the study of these things will tell you it's not a matter of if there will be another catastrophic impact like a Tunguska. Or Tunguska is the name of a place in the Siberia of Russia where people think, they don't know exactly what it was, but it's generally consensus is it was like a comet that exploded before it hit the Earth, and it incinerated an entire area of the forest.
So we were just lucky that it was not a populated area.
Yeah, it happened in
It happened
1909 or something like that.
Oh, okay.
But the
It burned up a whole lot of
yeah,
trees.
but the more recent ones that hit Russia,
In Chelyabinsk, yeah.
right?
That was
Chelyabinsk? What?
Chelyabinsk was a city, a little town in Russia,
Uh-huh.
and it was what, 3 years ago now?
Similar.
Wow.
A small meteor, maybe like
Did you hear about that? Tom?
yeah, it was maybe like just a couple meters in diameter.
Uh-huh.
It was big enough to make it to the lower atmosphere, but not big enough or not solid enough, or both, to make it directly to the ground. So it was called a bolide or fireball. It blew up in the atmosphere, caused a shock wave that blew out windows of a
Wow.
large part of the town, and all the I don't think there were any deaths, but all the damages were the result of people looking out the window of this fireball
Yeah,
and
but that
hitting
was
by
a
glass.
relatively small town, so something like that, a little bit bigger, would hit to New York, it would land a little bit lower. It would just cause massive destruction.
Oh yeah, massive
I
destruction.
mean, so
It could wipe out the global economy if it hit the wrong city. You know what I mean? Or you think about a geomagnetic storm.
Yeah, it's true.
What is a geomagnetic storm?
Have you ever heard of the Northern Lights?
Yeah,
Those are the visible effects of a geomagnetic storm.
I don't know much about what they are.
Without getting too in detail about the physics of it, the sun erupts constantly, spits off billions of tons of plasma, which is a crumpled up magnetic field turning around on itself with ionized gases and other things, and hurls these things through space. And we really don't understand much about the physics of it, because instead of slowing down, they actually speed up and all kinds of interesting things happen. But when one of these things, clouds of magnetized plasma coils and everything, washes over the Earth, the sun is massive compared to the Earth, so it just like tidal waves over the Earth. It causes the magnetic field lines of the Earth's magnetic field to compress on each other, and when they touch, the power that's in there goes like an electric current down through the magnetic field and enters the upper atmosphere, which is also ionized. It's called the ionosphere, and that causes gases to become ionized, and they give off light, just like a neon sign does. And that's the visible effect of it. But the other thing is that if this happens on a massive scale, it will interface with our electric grid and blow it out.
Wow.
Like if you plug if you've ever been to Europe?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you plug in your hair dryer into an outlet in Europe, you'll fry it.
Well, you can't. You have weird.
Well, if you had the plug to do it, you would fry it, and that's why they don't have.
Fry it.
Yeah, because the capacitor and the voltage over there is more than what your electronics are designed to handle.
To take.
And that could happen to our electric grid, and it has happened to our electric grid. In 1989, a storm blew out most of, I think it was Toronto or something like that. And there's been a number of these. So these are real threats that the entire world can actually come together on and solve cooperatively.
Yeah, these aren't science fiction. These things are very realistic. Or very
it's not
probable.
Obama playing with Star Wars over here.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, the funny thing is, it does sound like science fiction, but it's not. I mean, like he said, there's been a couple of events we've recorded.
How did Toronto deal with that thing when it happened?
It was a crisis, and they had to rebuild their electric grid, and it took, I think, a couple months to do so. And there was, people didn't have electricity.
So they were living without electricity for a couple of months or whatever.
Yeah, it was a problem. It was a real problem for hospitals.
We Americans, I guess, were.
I don't remember what time of year. I think it was around Halloween, but I might be wrong about that. I thought it was around Halloween when it happened, but it might have been wrong about that.
No, you couldn't think it didn't happen in January, February.
Yeah.
They don't.
But yeah, I mean it's a real threat that we have to deal with, and we can only really deal with it as a global community working together, which means we can't have presidents who are funding Muslim Brotherhood terrorists and trying to go to war against other countries that want to work with us on solving these problems.
Yeah, you think people screaming about having Hurricane Ike and Rita and so forth knock out their electricity for a few days or weeks.
Yeah, I know. Try Hurricane Solar Storm 2012 or whatever. I mean, actually, there was a solar storm in 2012 in June or whatever that if it had happened 12 or 10 or so days earlier, would have wiped out most of the planet's electric grid.
But then also,
Yeah, look, it's like, you had the Chicago fire like in the 1860s, whatever that was, right? Most people don't know.
You're talking about the Triangle Fire?
I'm sorry?
They're talking about the Triangle Factory fire?
No, the fire, they're talking about Miss O'Leary's cow, right? It's like, at any rate, the whole city burned down pretty much. And it's like what most people don't know is that you have a number of other towns and cities in the Midwest also caught fire and burned on that same day, right? They believe, a lot of people believe that was some sort of cosmic event.
Sure, yeah, there's a lot of it. There's a lot of stuff that's been this stuff has been happening, but we didn't really have the tools to understand what it was until after the 1970s, really. But in addition to this, since we're talking about space, another thing we actually have to focus on is the problem of drought, the problem of water availability. We were just at an event the other night, and for Handel's Messiah, and the pastor of the church was talking about where it was being hosted. He was talking about there was, how much did he say? 650 million people in the world without access to clean drinking water. Some of those people are in California. I mean, the way that he was talking about it, it sounded like it was all in Africa and Asia and so forth. These people live in Walnut Creek. They live in Oakland. They live in Sacramento and Fresno. Because California is a desert, and historically, it's been much drier than it has been in the last century. And the governor of California and the green policy of the country has attacked the idea that we would solve this problem by making more water available for people. So the solution of the pastor, bless his heart, was to say we need to give money so that people can take old gasoline jugs and fill them up with water more frequently, and they can have water pumps. We don't need a hand water pump. Lake Chad does not need a hand water pump. It needs a diversion of entire new rivers of clean water. So there are projects that have been on the books since the 60s. We've talked about some of these. The North American Water and Power Alliance is one of these. And this is the project to divert 20% of the runoff that hits the northwest coast of southeast Alaska up through Seattle.
Is that NWAPA thing?
Yeah.
That's what it is?
North American Water and Power Alliance is NWAPA.
Okay.
And divert 20% of that runoff inland to be taken up by the biosphere, and in the course of going back down through the rivers and so forth and going back to the ocean to then be recycled by nature to be used by the human economy and by the biosphere.
Can you explain why? Can people been against it for, I mean, are there scientists saying, oh, that's not a good idea because it's going to cost, I mean, what's the reason it's not being implemented? Is it
Because there is a green agenda that wants to reduce the population, and they are opposed to the use of technology to improve nature.
but they don't, I'm sure when you say, hey, let's try them in Nawapa, they're not going to go, oh, but wait, we want to reduce the population. I mean,
No, they don't say that. What they say,
saying
instead of
to
saying,
cover for that?
well, some people will say that. Yeah, some people will say that. But the average useful idiot will say, anytime that mankind tries to do something, there will be the law of unintended consequences and the precautionary principle and the butterfly effect, and nature is too complex for us to understand it. So therefore, the best thing to try to do is to die by not doing what you need to do to live.
Uh-huh.
And they don't want, most people you talk to will not have the courage to draw the logical conclusion of their policies. They instead just simply say, it's too complicated to know, and you're not the person who could know. And if you were, and you said so, then you're in the pay of the oil companies, or something equally stupid. Because the intention is to create an unescapable. That's what's ideological about the green movement, is that they've created an inability to have a rational discussion about policy, because every rational argument is rebutted with an unassailable thing like, it's too complicated, you couldn't know what will happen, you're in the pay of so and so, or what, you know what I mean? So then what's happened is that in order to actually do this, you cannot simply try to just debate the merits of it.
Well,
You have to actually
can you come
implement.
back with, yeah, well, the thing is, on the other side, your fracking areas, I mean, is it hypocrisy to say it's okay to frack and cause earthquakes, but it's not okay to try the Nawapa? Has anybody kind of looked at that as a hypocrisy?
Oh, sure, yeah, fracking is horrible. But I mean, actually, if you build Nawapa, you will, for at least a little while, you'll cause some small earthquakes, because you're putting, you know, if you look at the two pictures here of Folsom Lake, you know, water's not light. So if you fill a dam up, you actually will cause some earthquakes, because you cause the ground underneath to settle. Just like when you pump out gas, the ground settles underneath it.
Right.
Right. So, but the point is that we can control this stuff. We can forecast it under the work of Sergei Poulinets, looking at the coupling between the lithosphere and the ionosphere. You can forecast earthquakes, because earthquakes have various signal precursors that they let out that you can't look at with your eyes, but you can look at with technology. The eyes of infrared satellites, the eyes of ionization sniffers that can look at radon emissions and things like that. There's various things you can do to forecast the depth and magnitude and approximate time frame of an earthquake with a certain probability, like 90%, 30%, you know, and say, just like they forecast rain. They're not always right, but by understanding general trends and how processes of the atmosphere work and how humidity and temperature interact with wind shear, you can generally forecast whether you're going to have a tornado. You can't always say when or exactly where the tornado will be with current understanding.
It helps better when they don't shut down your NOAA satellite systems.
Oh yeah, that's always a plus.
Your detecting systems on patterns of weather.
Yeah, let me ask you a question. It's like, you know, I get into arguments with these kinds of people at times. What I tell them sometimes, I'm just going to ask if this has ever occurred to you at all. What I tell them is that World War II didn't cause the great man-made ecological disaster. It's never going to happen, right? I mean, you had like 1,000-plane raids, well, like every single day, like for years and years, right, on both sides of the earth. It's like that every oil facility in the Axis war became a bombing target, called black soot rising over the stratosphere, right? It's like you had, you know, people running, you know, tetraethyl lead everywhere. You have like engines running 120 octane gasoline, you know, like It didn't even have mufflers, much less catalytic converters. This is all over the world, right? And a year after it was all over, you couldn't have told what had happened.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the amount of emphasis that people put on a trace gas like CO2 when compared to the most effective greenhouse gas, which is water vapor. The point is not. The point is to say we're going to take a physical process and decide that we figured it out, and have anyone who challenges it, who's not credentialed, tell them it's too complicated for you to understand. I'm going to the experts. Then you have people who are credentialed to actually talk about it, to decry them as being under the pay of some nefarious evil guy. When the people who are actually right up there funding the green movement, a lot of them are oil companies because they don't want to allow for us to go to the atomic age. But also you have the British Empire. I mean, in our report, which we've put out now for 2 or 3 months, we document extensively the role of the British oligarchy, the monarchy, in promoting this policy, going back to the promotion that people should live near swamps and sewers so that they get more diseases. I mean, that was the policy of economics under Thomas Malthus. I mean, so this is nothing new.
Thomas Malthus wanted people to live by sewers and swamps.
So they could get more disease and die faster.
Really?
And he said so.
He said so?
Explicitly.
Is that the Malthusian when you talk about
Yes, that's Malthusianism.
Carson Thomas Malthus.
Yeah.
When is this?
When we say, look,
1820s.
when we say these people are satanic,
1820s.
we're not making this up. When we
So-
say these people are evil, we're not making this up. The thing is that these days, political correctness says you can't say evil. You can't say satanic. You can't say Hitler. Yeah, you can't say fascism because Godwin's law or some other stupid excuse. Godwin's law is this thing they say where
If
you know,
you say Hitler or something like that, then
it's a mathematical thing to say at some point in an argument, someone will finally reduce the argument to Nazis.
and
No, you really
At which
want
point they've
people
lost
come
because
unglued.
nothing is that bad.
You really want to watch
And
these idiots come unglued, you need to start talking
there's no
about
more
Rachel
discussion.
Carson.
That ended the discussion. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Rachel Carson is way the hell beyond Hitler, Joseph Stalin, or Genghis Khan, or anything like that. I mean, you've had since these efforts of hers got DDT banned, you've had 100 million people died from malaria for no rational reason at all.
Did Rachel Carson do that intentionally, or did she think that was a good DDT was poisonous? I mean,
Well, you know what? When they looked at the study, they found out that the birds were deficient in
Some of them
calcium.
are stooges.
But the point is that since her findings had been refuted, did she come out and retract? No. So the point is that these what you have is a situation
Breast cancer.
where you have people who are promoted in certain capacities and their lives become a little more comfortable, and they may or may not know what's going on. And these are people that LaRouche identifies as unwitting agents of the British Empire. Then you actually have people who do know what their policies, the effect of their policies are.
Mhm.
And these are people like Schellenhuber or Al Gore. These are people.
So you think of Al Gore's actually being on the same page?
Oh yeah, this guy
Really?
knows. Oh, for sure. I mean, the guy flies around in a giant jet, has a giant silver mine, lives in luxury. He's not trying to be ecologically friendly. This guy's a dipshit.
Really? He has a
Yeah,
silver
someone should
mine?
apologize for him. I mean, the guy's a.
Really?
He needs to apologize for existing. I mean, my God.
Yeah, well, let me tell you-
His name is. I mean, and look at his weight. The poor guy. I mean, we should just have to call him Al Gordo because that would make it's more polite to refer to someone that way. But
It's hedge fund.
yeah, he had a hedge fund with a guy named David Blood.
It was a silver mine as a private jet.
Or zinc mine, not silver, zinc. But
Let
anyway,
me talk about birds and DDT, because that turned out to be total bullshit.
yeah.
Someone actually took an ornithology
Why
course.
would okay, so what? What was killing all these
From-
birds?
from-
It was a lack of calcium in their diet. That's what was crushing the egg.
Calcium?
No,
Yeah,
they
eggs
use
are
the
made of
target
calcium.
practice. It's like, that they started keeping chickens in cages in the 1960s, right? So before that, it was like, the chickens had the run of the place everywhere, and it's like, you get hawks and eagles that dive down and carry some chicken off. What do you think the farmer's going to do when he sees that? Second or third time when he sees it, 12 cages is going to come out. That's why, like the hawks and eagles were dying.
The farmers were shooting them though.
Everyone took a course in ornithology under America's greatest expert.
Hold on, we should talk about this in the details of it later, because I want to get to a bigger point.
Okay. He asked a point blank in the classroom about that. He said it's a bunch of bullshit. He said no effect whatsoever on birds of prey, their eggs, or anything else.
The DDT is.
The basis of what I want to end with is to take an artistic approach to this, because I think this may be a little bit too long, but I'm gonna try to be quick about it. It's hot. Okay, I'm gonna try to be quick about it. I'm not blocking that projector. The other day we had a presentation here where we were talking about a catenary, and we actually have a catenary now instead of just asking you to imagine one.
Oh, okay.
A catenary. This is a catenary. A catenary is the shape that's made by any kind of hanging chain or hanging. And the principle of the catenary, Keisha, can you come up here for a moment? The principle of a catenary, hold this end here. Here's I got my Vanna White here. So the principle of the
You gotta use your hand.
I know, right? The principle of the catenary is that every link on this chain is thank you very much. Every link on the chain has equal tension with every other link on the chain, regardless of it's a thin catenary like this or a wide one like this. There's an equal tension on every single link, so that if I shorten it, the rest of it doesn't change. If you don't move your hand, the rest of the link doesn't change its shape, even if you remove part of the chain, because there is an equal tension on it. And if instead of, thank you, Miss White, instead of thinking about it from the standpoint of an upside down curve, if you were to flip it in reverse so that this ends of the chain are actually a foundation and the bottom of the chain here is the top, that's how Brunelleschi built his dome, to be the highest dome.
I'm gonna build.
Yeah, like that,
Basically.
Yeah.
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 Right.
That's the basis of how Brunelleschi was able to build the tallest freestanding dome in Europe, or maybe even still the world, I think, in terms of without use of the kinds of massive amount of scaffolding that would have been required for a dome that was a half circle.
So where did he use the catenaries?
The catenary was used in the construction of the dome itself.
Did he build the thing and then somehow hoist it up there?
No, he built it. He built it.
Scaffold.
He built it from the standpoint of each of these parts, from the bottom all the way to the top, and it used its own, the fact that every link in the chain was equal tension to support its own weight. And that's the point about, like, you think about the Roman arches. You know what a Roman arch is? It's a half circle. And you have the keystone, which sets in the middle, and the entire arch will fall in on itself until the keystone is placed at the top center.
It had to be at the Pantheon.
Yeah, well, that's how they built their aqueducts. And they had the Roman arches, were these half circles, and all this. I think the way they built the Pantheon was they had a massive amount of wood as scaffolding on the inside to hold it up. But with the Brunelleschi's dome, he didn't need that because of the physical curvature that was used to build it. And the thing about the catenary is, I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, Joel, but I think it was Galileo Galilei, who tried to reproduce the catenary as a parabola. Yeah. So a parabola is a curve which is generated by a mathematical formula, which is, there's a lot of different shapes to a parabola that you can make in terms of how wide it is, but basically, I think it's like x equals y squared or something like that. It's an exponential curve. It's generated by following a mathematical formula. The catenary is generated by following a physical effect, a physical cause. And the difference is when you're generating an economy, and this is something I wanted to talk about more, but I don't have time to really go into it. When you're generating an economy, you have to generate your economy by the use of physical causes, not mathematical formulas. If you were to build an arch out of a parabola, the arch would not be able to sustain itself. You have without supporting structures.
You can say that there are universal principles, or you're saying physical causes, same idea, that govern the universe. So the same universal principle or cause that organizes that the principle behind the catenary is similar to what we study in terms of some people who've been coming here to study Kepler with us, where there is a reason why you can actually create or develop circular action to organize 5 harmonic solids that you can do with other types of shapes. Only 5 shapes can come from circular action.
Yeah, or in other words, that the universe itself, the physical laws of physics of the universe, they allow for certain things to happen, and they don't allow for certain other things to happen. And in allowing for certain things to happen, like, for example, when a hanging chain has equal tension in every link, it allows for this to happen. It doesn't allow for that to happen with other shapes. That if you follow and if you discover those things, if you use the creative powers of your mind to discover those things that are allowed to happen by the laws of nature, natural law, and you build your world, your society around the use of those laws, you will thrive. Your nature, your civilization will improve. If you, however, engage in organizing your society according to simply formulas or just axiomatically derived, we believe this, and therefore, as a result of believing this, we're going to do that, from ideology, if those happen to be wrong opinions about that conflict with the natural laws of the universe, your civilization will collapse. And because it's like trying to fly without wings. And what I had up here before in terms of the immense amount of worthless money, that was created by people having beliefs in formulas and rules that had completely nothing to do with what is actually physically necessary to support society. In fact, it was the opposite. It was a parasitical relationship to society. And when we go to a credit system where the credit of the value of the currency, the creditworthiness of the currency, is directly involved in helping more people in the labor force understand physical principles, we will be able to actually fix the problems that we face. And that, there's a lot more that could be said about it, but for now, I think I want to leave it at that. I'm going to officially end the presentation part, and we can just have more informal discussion.
So I was going to ask on the when they were